Welcome. Now, normally we might say this is the graveyard slot after lunch, but not when we are welcoming our keynote, Rabbi Dr. Larry Hoffman. So let you just settle down. I'm going to do a tiny brief introduction so that Larry really gets all the time, and you will thank me for that. So Rabbi Dr. Larry Hoffman is Emeritus Professor of Liturgy, Worship, and Ritual at Hebrew Union College. He also manages the Tisch Fellowship. He has had not just one, the Tisch Fellowship, which draws out cantorial and rabbinical students of note to create a special pathway and to really nurture the new rabbis and cantors of today. Larry has had not one, but 2 books awarded the National Book Award in the US. But most importantly for us is that when you become a rabbi, it is Larry's books that you want on your shelves. That anyone who's been in the business since 2000 will know that Larry's co-founding of Synagogue 2000 with Dr. Ron Wolfson, thinking how to regenerate and think about how synagogues work, how they welcome, how they develop, how they are dynamic. All of us who are in the business of synagogues, which is all of us here, it is Rabbi Dr. Larry Hoffman who really captures what it is to be in community and what matters. And why did we so desperately want Larry to come? Back in November, we invited Larry to be with us and to be our scholar in residence for Rabbinic Kala. We wanted to learn with Larry. We wanted to be nourished and to rethink about our rabbinate and how we were serving our liberal congregations. We had an amazing time, didn't we? And I think Larry might say that too. And I think Charley immediately thought, Larry, will you and Joel come for Biennial? So Larry speaks about prayer, about the cycle of the Jewish year, about Jewish conversations replacing and being as good as all other parts of Jewish life. Larry, we are so pleased that you're here. Thank you.
Thanks to Rebecca, and thank you all for coming here and dozing off here rather than outside in your rooms. Actually, what I really do is all of the above, but something else that she didn't mention. I'm thinking of a story that Rabbi Gunther Plaut tells, Rabbi Gunther Plaut of blessed memory, who was a rabbi of several large congregations in the United States and Canada. When he moved to the largest congregation in Canada called Holy Blossom Temple in, yes it is, in Toronto, he tells a story of telling his assistant that she should make no appointments for him in the morning, and that in fact, if phone calls came in, if she should say to whoever's calling, I'm sorry, the rabbi will have to call you back. He is busy thinking. You can imagine how that went over. Within a month, he had to change the instructions to say, the rabbi will phone you later. He is in conference. Oh, conference, that's understandable. I want to say I've been blessed my whole life by working in an institution, the Hebrew Union College, that actually pays me to think. I don't have to say, be in conference. What I can say is, I'm sorry, I can't be in conference, I'm thinking, which is much better. So that's what I really do for a living, but since rarely will people pay you for that, I pretend to do other things as well. So I want to take you on a trip through thinking today. I want to think about Jewish history differently. I want to think about the current era that we're in, which Joel introduced so beautifully this morning, and my own take on it. I'm in perfectly agree with him. You won't be surprised to know. I've learned everything I know from him, apparently. And so So I want to explore with you this current moment that he quite correctly described as historic, so that we can understand more fully our historic undertaking. In order to do that, I'm going to start with 3 animal stories. So my first story is a story of a gazelle in Africa. And the gazelle is either running or hopping, whatever gazelles do, through the veldt. which is a Yiddish word too, but that's never mind. And so this gazelle is happily going about its business when it's attacked by a lion. Lion eats gazelle, has a great dinner, lion goes to sleep. Mrs. Gazelle, back at the lair, wonders where's her husband? She doesn't know. And he should be back by now. You know, it's Shabbos, dinner, and everything. So she runs out to see what's happening, and oh my God, she finds her husband's remains on the path. Well, Mrs. Gazelle goes back and she grieves. If you have tests, you know that animals grieve just the way we do. And she nuzzles in with her children and so on, and they grieve for their lost partner and father. So far, just like human beings. But this is what Mrs. Gazelle does not do. She does not now write a book on the subject, which would be entitled, Why Bad Things Happen to Good Gazelles, right? That is because even though animals feel and animals think to some extent, animals do not have the same kind of self-consciousness that we do. It is only the human species, the human condition, where we master language, where we understand that we have a story, where we spend our lives building lives, where we think about, what do I do? And so on and so forth. And at some point, we understand what are called limits. The lion ate the gazelle. That's terrible, we would say. I've got to write a book against it. Read an op-ed to the newspaper. I mean, that's wrong. We human beings have a sense of right and wrong. We have a sense of limits. The first thing that we see then is that human beings need a sense of limits. This sense of limits is a binary opposite. It's you can, you can't. You may not. Kosher, treif. Mutar, asur. In many ways we describe it. But you human beings are built with the assumption that there are limits to everything in the universe, and part of what we have to do is learn how to live with what we should and shouldn't do. That's the way it is. I'm going to decide two other stories. Both stories indicate two other ways that human beings differ from animals. The first one is we have a sense of limits. Not what we can and can't do because of our physical ability, but I mean moral limits. Limits to what you should and shouldn't do, that kind of thing. All right, second story. Second story is a bumblebee. We have a lot of bumblebees where I come from, and I know very little about them, except that they come out when you're sitting in your sukkah. That much I know. But bumblebees are very smart animals. They can communicate with one another, send messages back and forth. But here's the most amazing thing about bumblebees. They get up in the morning, and they fly somewhere, seemingly random, and they end up on a flower. And they do something called pollination, whatever that is, I forget. And then they move to another flower, and to another flower, another flower. Comes the end of the day, who knows what flower they're on? And this is the amazing thing. They know exactly where they are and exactly where they have to go home to, where their hive is, and they can take a beeline home. They know exactly how to get there. This amazes me, because I lose my car in the parking lot in 5 minutes. So I observe that bumblebees, like other animals, know things. It's not like they are ignorant. They know a lot. Some things better than me. But here's what they don't do, what human beings do. We not only know, but we know that we know. And we know that we don't know. And we know that if we could know what we don't know, then we would know more, but still there are things we don't know, and on and on and on. We then are self-conscious animals again, and part of what we do is not just limits. Part of what we do is we are in love with truths. I mean, all those factoids that they give you. Guess what I read in the paper? You won't believe what I just heard. And some stupid fact comes out of your mouth, and your friend says, wow, really? No kidding. We love new truths. Truths, we just live with them. Now, that means we have to decide, but is it really true? Especially now in our era with false news and what goes on in the internet and so on, right? But even before that, there was an attempt for us, we really wanted to know, is that really true? Are you serious? Is it really so? So part of what we do is we negotiate not just limits with a binary opposite of you may not, but truths. We want to know what's true and what's false. This then is the second way that human beings are different. We not only know, but we know that we know, and then we have to decide, is it true or is it false? And we build up a set of truths by which we shall live. We need limits and we need truths. Third story. Third story is a Canadian beaver. Now you ask, why a Canadian beaver? Because I come from Canada and I have a certain loyalty, and because I first encountered beavers in Canada, which is not exactly true, actually. I went to a boring summer camp one year, and the counselors would say, go look for the beavers. So we stood there looking for beavers, and we never saw any. But there was a beaver dam, and he would say, just watch for the beaver to come out. It never did, but I imagined it. What if I'd seen a beaver? What would it look like? Well, I know they're busy as a beaver, right? So I know what they do. They mostly do chomping. They chomp on wood to build homes. So here's what you get with a beaver. Chomp, 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 dot, 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 dot. That's it. Here's what you don't get from a beaver. Dot, 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 dot. You will never get that from a beaver. Human beings, on the other hand, can't help but put things into music. We can't help but find patterns in things. We are in love with patterns. We can't stand things out of order, even messy people. My desk doesn't always look wonderful, though it might underneath everything that's on it. But every once in a while, you're like me, you look at your desk, even in this age when you don't use paper. Somehow, paper grows on my desk. Don't you once in a while look at your desk and you say, that's it? That's enough? I've had it up to here. So far, no further. I'm going to clean my desk. So what do? I look at my desk and I say, oh, here's a paper I should have read. I'll put it in a pile I should read. This is a bill I think I paid. I make a new pile called bills I think I should pay. Then I see a to-do list from a week ago, but I didn't do it. So I put it on to-do list pile. Soon I run out of piles and I say miscellaneous. Now I have 5 piles sitting on my desk. I still don't know where to find things, but it looks good, you know? I feel much better. There's something about we want things in order. You know all those science fiction movies about the blob that metastasizes? And why do we fear cancer so much? Because it metastasizes. The very idea there's a blob inside of you. I mean, you can't control it. It shows up anywhere. That's our greatest nightmare. The world is out of control, completely out of control. We can't stand that. Part of us is this aesthetic instinct to want things that cohere, things that have form, structure, pattern. We love patterns of things. We find patterns even when they're not there. We insist that the world should make sense. This is the third way in which humans are different. It's an aesthetic sense that there should be order, pattern, structure, beauty. It should all cohere, not just be an utter mess. We can't stand it if our lives are an utter mess. That's our greatest fear. Oh my God, things are out of control. Me too, right? All right, now, human beings who need these 3 things need them because of the human condition. And we have invented something which will help with the human condition, and that thing is called religion. All religions provide these 3 things which we need all the time: limits, truth, and meaning, I will call it. Where things cohere is meaningful. If I yell out to you something like 7, you say, 7 what? I say, days of the week. You say, right, Shabbat, 7. What if I take some dice and I throw it? You say, craps, I got it. You're rolling a 7. In other words, only with 2 sets of data does the first make sense. That meaning is when things cohere. They make sense. All right, we need these 3 things. Religion gives us all 3 of them. All the time. But, and here's the fun part, at various stages in human history, with different religions, it's different. We'll talk about Judaism today. No surprise there, right? Judaism, we will find that at different stages of our history, One of these three strategies or games, I'll call them games, like they tell you how to move in life, right? One of these three games takes priority. And you can look at Jewish history and see it as a pattern in which one game took priority with the rabbinic period. Joel talked about that this morning. A second one takes priority in the 19th century with the Enlightenment, hitting Jews that were released from the ghetto with Napoleon. And a third one takes priority now. And that's what makes this an exciting moment. We are changing the game. And only if you understand that do you understand what we are about as progressive Jews. Only if you understand that do you know why this is a historic moment for us. Why, as I described it this morning, we are living through a singularity, a uniquely historic moment in time that we want to be part of. So very quickly, let me take you through Jewish history and show you how these games have played themselves out. We'll start with the rabbis, all right? Joel talked about halakha, Jewish law. He talked about the Talmud and so on. He correctly defined the way in which rabbis applied legal thinking to everything. I'm going to call that the game of limits. The rabbis didn't just give them what you may and may not do in terms of ethics, but what you may and may not do about building a sukkah, whether on an elephant and so on. You remember that? Now, I want to point out to you that much of this legality is arbitrary. Yeah, I mean, it's a way to make sense of the universe, and not a terrible way indeed if you buy into it. And the rabbis specialized in it. I want to be careful that you know I'm not making fun of it. I'm not looking down at it. I understand as a distinctively Jewish way of thinking, which I love, as a matter of fact. I love reading Talmud. I love it. I love reading commentaries. I just know that the time for me, when this was central to my life, was long past. But I appreciate it as a Jewish way of doing things, and we get a lot from our books, even our sacred books that are mostly legal. But look how arbitrary it is. I'll use, Joel talked about Turkey this morning. So I'll give you an example from Kashrut. So somebody wants to learn Judaism and says, I want to know what Jewish life is like. I hear there's something called keeping kosher. Can you describe it to me, Rabbi? Yes, I can, say I. Good. What do I have to know? I said, well, one of the rules is you can't mix milk with meat. Aha. So says this friend, what about chicken? Can you mix milk with chicken? Is that meat? Well, I say the Talmud talks about that. Actually decides chicken is indeed meat. My friend, no fool, she says to me, I got it now. Fish is meat, right? No, actually not. Why not? Just like that. In other words, it's not always so logical. I want to remind you that animals do not appear in a state of nature with a K stamped on them. Right? We put it there. That doesn't mean that it's foolish. I'm going to say later on that what does matter is how we map the world. But this is a map with limits. And that's what's unique about the rabbinic way of doing things. They use limits for their maps. Now, what's really important here is three intersecting lines. Imagine three lines that intersect. One's called theology, thinking about God, about ultimates. Another one I'm going to call anthropology, but religious anthropology. In other words, a theory of human nature. And the third line is cosmology. Gee, what's the universe like out there? Is there even an out there? Right? Now, in fact, our deepest selves, we stand, here I stand, as it were, at the intersection of those three beliefs. What do you think about the world? What do you think about human nature? What do you think about ultimates? That defines your basic stance in life. And each of the three periods that I'm about to describe, the limits period that we're looking at now, from rabbinic times all the way to the Enlightenment, and then the Enlightenment period, and then finally today, there's a different view of cosmology, anthropology, and theology. Let's look at the cosmology of the rabbinic period, of these limits. The world is like a maze. God created the entire thing. Only God understands it. You're born into the maze. And the trick is you have to find your way in the maze of life and get out the other end when you die without bumping into the walls. The whole point is to make sure you operate properly. So you learn what shoe to put on first, what shoelace to tie first, what you can wear, what you can't wear, what you can eat, what you can't eat, who you can marry, who you can't, what all these sort of rules, and that becomes your life, right? So it's a maze governed by rules. And you thank God if you can get through it without being damaged along the way. But if you have a world made up of rules, limits, right? You can't have rules without a rule maker. And what does that make you if you're constantly trying to figure out the rules? What's your anthropology? The anthropology is, well, you're all basically backsliding children. Constantly trying to live up to the rules, but you're constantly going to make mistakes. And so, after all, you're going to sin. That's the word for it. Hence, the rabbis give us a new calendar. In the original biblical calendar, Pesach, our freedom, was the new year. Not for the rabbis. They take a relatively unimportant biblical holiday called Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and they say, that's the high holidays. Why? Because Yom Kippur is Yom Hadin. It's the day when you stand before God in judgment. And after all, it's all about, did you keep the rules well enough or not? Moreover, go back to cosmology. Cosmology is made up of all these people, but now anthropology, what's the nature of the people in them? I say backsliding children, but you also need human beings who will make sure that you keep the rules. And God is like a superhuman being. So in the theology, God is Avinu Malkeinu. In the Roman Empire, Avinu, the father in a patriarchal culture, was the rule maker and the decider in the house. And the emperor, Malkeinu, was the same thing in the body politic. So God emerges as the great judge. And you stand before the judge on Yom Kippur. God is Avinu, God is Malkeinu. And we, Ashamnu, Bagadnu, we've sinned. And we got to get right with God. So that's the universe that the rabbis give us. The theology, the anthropology, and the cosmology. And it worked for a very long time. Part of it had to do, of course, with how you grow up. I should talk about that. What's the goal of growing up? The goal of growing up is to know the rules, right? And so at age 13, it says you are a bar mitzvah if you're a boy. Apparently, they didn't think girls grew up. We won't go into that. So a boy who's bar mitzvah just means now you're old enough to be responsible for keeping all the rules. By the 5th century, we hear a story about how fathers should say of their sons when they reach the age of 13, Baruch shepatarani me'on sho shel zeh, which means actually, blessed is God who has released me from the punishment due from this kid. Joel translated that for my series of books, my People's Prayer Book, and he says in his commentary, perhaps a better translation would be good riddance. Now, I mean, think about that. What the father is saying is, oh my God, up until now, every day I worry about you're going to sin and I'm responsible. Now you're on your own. Hope you don't sin. Good for you, but you're responsible now. I don't have to worry about it anymore. That's the world that you live in, right? So the boy becomes bar mitzvah, and you prove you're a bar mitzvah by knowing the mitzvot, and you prove you know the mitzvot because you can daven, you can now lead services, you can read Torah and all the other stuff, right? Bar mitzvah wasn't a big deal till the Middle Ages. Actually, they didn't have a bar mitzvah ceremony until then. Somewhere around the 16th century, they got the idea that a boy should give a speech. The boys were not able to do that at age 13, so the rabbis wrote it for them. The speech was of necessity a speech about rules. Most boys said that they were given these speeches, and a lot of people, who very smart boys, tell us in their memoirs they didn't understand one word of their speech. They just read it. But the fathers were proud, and that's all that really mattered, you know. Once in a while, they had a boy who knew how to do it, by the way. I'll give you the case of Isaac Deutscher. Isaac Deutscher lived at the end of the 19th century into the 20th century. Isaac Deutscher actually understood the rules. He was a genius. The guy knew Talmud and the codes and everything by the time he was 13. He says, I'm running my own speech. So he writes a speech about a bird that the Talmud says flies overhead every 600 years. And Deutscher writes on the subject of what would happen if the bird should drop some spittle into your soup, but it should be more than maybe the 1/60th that Joel talked about. Is the bird kosher or treif, and therefore is the soup kosher or treif? It comes only one every 600 years. Maybe there's a special rule for it. This is his bar mitzvah talk. But it was so good, they declared him bar mitzvah and they made him a rabbi. Because that's the ideal. A boy can grow up and be an expert at the rules, and he already could do that. As an aside, I note that Deutscher already at the age of 13 was reading forbidden literature, however, and mostly Marxism. And in fact, shortly after his bar mitzvah, he actually went to a cemetery and ate some food sitting on the grave of a tzaddik on Yom Kippur, just to see what would happen. When he wasn't struck dead, he decided that's that. Regardless of his speech, he ultimately became a communist, and he wrote books on the heroes in her life, not Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, no. He wrote on Marx and Stalin. Those are the people who he thought were heroes. So sometimes bar mitzvah doesn't work out quite so well. Well, at any rate, you get the picture of that world, don't you? And I want to say that lasted until the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment changed everything. The Enlightenment was about truth. It was informed by science. Science had discovered the way to actually know truths. Up until then, what you had was metaphysical truths about the universe, primarily sponsored by the church. Science wasn't so good for the church. It did away with metaphysical truths. It wasn't so great for Judaism either, because there was no truth, it seemed, behind these arbitrary rules. And so Jews, too, fell into the notion of, you know what, we want truth. See how the game slowly shifted in the Jewish community from limits to truths. Now, I don't mean that Talmud doesn't give you truths. It does. And I don't mean that there are no limits for Reformed Jews in the 19th century Germany. Not at all. We need all three all the time. But one takes priority, and we now entered a period of truth finding. So let's see what happens when Jews now are free to especially love truths, especially scientific truths. First of all, what has the world become? It's no longer a maze that you have to get through and you need rules. The world is now the epitome of reason. If you use reason and science, you'll discover it all. God has given us reason. God is, in fact, a giver of reason, but even God, come to think of it, changes, because reasonably you can't think of God having a body anymore. Even Moses Maimonides knew that. So God became, for these rabbis in Germany in the 1800s, God became an idea. They just started with a God idea. Because an idea is true or false. And a new question suddenly pops up, a question Jews hadn't bothered asking mostly. Do you believe in God? Like, do you believe in whatever else it is? This now became a Jewish question. It was not a big question before that. The question before that is, are you going to do the rules? Do you know how to keep kosher? Do you know how to keep Shabbat? That's the question. But now it's, if God is an idea, how do we know God? And how is God knowable? And can we now believe in God? And what kind of God do we believe in? It's now all about truths, you see? And we ourselves, what's human nature? Anthropology. We are now people of reason. This is the age of reason. We may look different on the outside, after all. Some people are German, and others are French, and others are British, and others are who knows what. But we are all gifted with reason, went the philosophy of the period. Hence, reason underneath makes us one human community. That's what the world is made of this anthropology of all being equal in terms of reason. If only we could educate people, they would exercise their reason, we would discover all the truths of the universe, and everything would be just fine. As for the cosmology, well, the rules are all there. Exercise your reason, use science, you'll figure it all out. This was science triumphant. The notion that we can know everything. It's only a matter of time. As if mathematicians were writing their equations on this great ballroom wall, starting over here and starting over there. They'll meet in the middle and they'll say, congratulations, it all matches up. We know it all now. That was actually the thought at the time. So we get a new kind of Judaism. A Judaism intrigued with truths. By the way, they did away with bar mitzvah. After all, how many truths can a 13-year-old kid know? Forget it. But wait until you're a little older and they'll have something called confirmation. And girls can know truths too, mazel tov. So now girls can be confirmed as well. Now both girls and boys can grow up. And they prove they grow up by knowing the truths. It wasn't like you had to now daven or you had to lead services. Instead, they had something called a catechism. Boys and girls at age 15 would walk up to the front, and in front of the ark, they would say, I believe in God and Torah and Israel, or whatever they were taught to say. In other words, demonstrate you know the truths. Congratulations, you're an adult. Everything then changed with the notion that it's all about truths. And that lasted until into the 20th century. Because by the 20th century, even by the early part of the 20th century, it was becoming apparent that we would never know everything. In fact, at one point, I think it could have been 1831 or 1931, when Gödel published the incompleteness theorem and demonstrating that you'd never have a mathematics that knew everything. Couldn't happen. And people began doubting about how much do we really know after all. The universe is so vast. Mostly, though, you had a new kind of physics, which talked about human beings that actually changed the nature of what we see. The world then isn't simply us just taking note of the universe. That's the old idea. Oh, I'm a scientist. I'll take notes on the universe. Someday we'll all meet, all the scientists, and we'll have a bunch of notebooks, and there it is. We'll have everything down. It wasn't like that, actually. Philosopher of science Hilary Putnam put it well when he said, the old notion was that you take notes on the universe out there, and then you got it all right. Look at your notes, look at the universe. If they match, you got it. No, he said, we are in a participational universe. If you need an analogy, he said, the analogy is the mind and the world together make up the mind and the world. We help create the universe, which is what Judaism said once upon a time. Remember, we are co-creators with God. Turns out we actually are. Actually, before the scientists and the philosophers were onto it, artists had figured this out. Take a look at Monet, right? Monet and his school of thought, right, the Impressionists. Monet takes a look at Rouen Cathedral, and he does like 15 or 18 paintings of it. I can't remember how many. Same with wheat fields. Not just one, but a lot of them. Now imagine we have Monet here, right? So I say, Claude, we want to buy one of your works, but by God, they're a lot of money. So we love the Rouen Cathedral, but I see you got 18 of them. If we're spending this kind of money, we want the right one. Which is the real Rouen Cathedral? Monet shrugs and says to himself, I hope they're paying me a lot for this. And says, well, in fact, they're all right. Because the cathedral changes with the light that hits us. We see it differently. We change the world even as we observe it. Because it's a combination of what the world gives us and what we put into the world. The world changes. It's just a short step from there to Picasso, who does a painting of Gertrude Stein and shows it to her lover, who says, I don't know, Gertrude doesn't look like that. And Picasso says, don't worry, she will. She will. You know how much truth there is in that? Once I hear a melody, the world sounds differently. I sing my way through it differently. Once I'm in a ritual, which is what I really do for a living when I think, figure out the rituals that we do, the world's altogether different when I walk out of it. I left Shabbat services, last night, this morning, and the world is different. And once I see things differently, it's hard to see them in any other way. So we do make up the world. It's a participational universe. In that kind of a universe, though of course truths are important, just like limits, suddenly we feel the burden of having to decide what the world is. And an opportunity at the same time. And that's where we live today. We live today with this third game, the game of putting together, constructing a universe, a world that fits, that coheres, that touches us, connects us. We call that a world of meaning. We want the world to have meaning. We are all in a search for meaning. By now, that's commonplace to say, but it's so profoundly true. What we look for now from religion, us, from our Judaism, we're looking for meaning. What is meaning? Meaning is the way we connect disparate facts, different observations about the world, and make a picture of it. It is all about meaning. Now, I could give you lots of examples of that. I have time for just one. It's the calendar. We really don't know what time is. Well, who knows what time is, right? But we all know it's important, and we try to keep time. But what actually is it? So we devise a way to make sense of time, make meaning out of it. We call that a calendar. How many people here still buy paper diaries that you put in your pocket? How many people do still buy them? You wouldn't admit it because you think it's old-fashioned, right? Most of you remember those days. If not, ask the person older sitting next to you. So we used to buy these diaries, and you spend, I don't know, 15 pounds on them or whatever it is, and you get it for each new year. Now you open it up and you look at it, and what you discover is about 15 pounds on nothing. Not a thing in it. Now you observe that actually has numbers written down the side, and you open it at a double page, and the double page tells you what time is. Time is divided into a week. A week is made up of 6.5 days, because one of the days is smaller than the other 6 days. Now, nothing's written down except there are numbers on the side, and you discover now the point of time. The point of time is to fill it up with appointments. You would never admit you have a free day. God forbid. You're always busy. If you're not busy, there's something wrong with you. You're not living up to expectation. You're not filling up your time productively. It's always important to have too many appointments. And when people say, how are you? The right answer is busy, busy, oh, busy, busy. Good for you. You're useful, we say. The rule seems to be that the person who dies with the most books filled with appointments wins. I now give you a different concept of time, the Jewish concept of time. Because you can get Jewish calendars here too. I assume that, like in the United States, these come for free. It doesn't cost you 15 pounds. These you get probably from the kosher butcher, I don't know, or the funeral home maybe. And they're very big. You couldn't put it in your pocket or your pocketbook no matter what you wanted to do. They go on your wall. Now, when you hang it up, you look at it, and the first thing you notice is that this seems to be devised so that poor artists have a place to display their ware. Look more carefully, you see there's a bottom panel, see? And the bottom panel, there's your Jewish time. And what you discover is there's no room for appointments. It's already decided. Tells you when Shabbos is, tells you when you have services, tells you when to light candles and special days. Our time comes patterned already. And the pattern is pretty obvious. Some days are written in red. They're the good days. One each week is called Shabbat. Day before is called Erev Shabbat. Day after is called Motzei Shabbat. The other days have no names, they're unimportant. The only purpose of time is to get to Shabbat. Right? Tense, TGIF, thank God it's Friday. I figure that was written by a Jew. And then you have days that are read behind Shabbat, like Rosh Chodesh. And that's a great idea. Imagine it's like Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is just the biggest Rosh Chodesh. They used to say Kiddushan for Rosh Chodesh. Imagine that. Every month you get to start all over again. Wow. And then there are the holidays. So we live by our calendar. That's how we pattern time. So here you have a choice, friends. What calendar is most important to you? You want to die and win because you had a whole lot of appointments? Or do you want to know that you kept holidays or family times, times to pray, times to think, times to celebrate your freedom at Pesach, time, and so on? You have a choice. Do you want to make up time all by yourself, or do you want to fit into the time that Judaism provides you? And if you're here, you probably value the Jewish calendar. That's what I mean by a Jewish way of patterning the universe. And there are many others as well. The whole point of going to services, I was talking this morning to people, is it's a way to understand the patterning of the Jewish universe and to pattern our lives in a different way. Well, we live then, to sum up, we live now in an era where, of course, we need limits and, of course, we need truths. But you know what? I got lots of limits. We don't need more limits. The people who don't keep the limits don't keep them because they're not meaningful. And I don't need more truths. I'm super saturated with truths. I don't want to even go online anymore for anything, God forbid. I'm overwhelmed with them. And besides, I can look up what I want. But meaning, who doesn't want meaning in life? That's what we need. Synagogues are a place now that provide people with human meaning. Communities that mean something. Conversations about the things that we worry about and we don't want to talk to anybody else about. What happens after we die? How shall I raise my children? How shall I be a good grandparent? What do I want to leave behind to the world? What do I stand for above all else? How shall I help the world in my own little tiny way when it seems like I can't be of any use on a big scale? And on and on and on. What do I think about the world? That's what meaning is about. Another way of thinking of it is mattering. That's why I love the title of your biennial weekend, to share what matters. Because when we formulate the world, we are formulating it in a way that matters to us. We connect this with this because we like the picture that it conveys. Hence my last analogy. My last analogy is, I remember when I was sick, and a lovely woman, a friend of my mother, who I called Auntie something or other, brought over a gift. It was a gift that no one gives anymore because now everything's on your phone. But in those days, it was something called a massive workbook. And in it were all kinds of fun things you could do as a kid. And one of the most fun things was connect the dots. Now I think about that. I'm a 7-year-old and I'm connecting the dots and I love it. And I turn the page and I do it again and again and again. And I think back, why did I do that? I want to say it's because I was practicing to be God. Like God, at least, if not God. I was learning how to make up a universe. Because in fact, there's nothing on the page but numbers. You connect the numbers, there's a picture of a ship and some waves. And you've made something out of nothing, like God, creation ex nihilo, out of nothing, yesh me'ayin, now something. That's what the divine does. In our new age, an age of meaning and mattering, God becomes the creative deity. And we see ourselves patting ourselves every day after a God who insists you can create a world that is phenomenal. You can create a meaningful world that matters to people. You can do this, and if you don't, no one else will. And so we are now connecting the dots of our lives, or we used to connect dots of our workbook. Connecting the dots of our lives means whatever comes over the horizon, a war, oh my God, a pandemic. But also a beautiful surprise, a grandchild born, or reaching an age when we never thought we'd live in a birthday this morning. 103-year-old was Ruth, is that her name? Happy birthday, 103 years old. I don't know her, but I feel wonderful because I was there for it. These are the dots that come in our lives, and we decide whether to mark them or not. We didn't have to sing happy birthday, we did. We now are connecting those dots. And connecting the dots of life, I want to say, is much harder than connecting the dots on a page because they don't come numbered. You decide what picture you want to make of it. So you have a choice. You can either opt out and say, let somebody else determine the world for me. Or you can say, I'm going to determine the world. I will draw the dots. I will be part of the Jewish scheme of things, which has taught me 3,000 years how to connect dots and how to find meaning. And I'll do it in my community. That is the purpose of religion today. And you, in this movement of which you are a proud part of, you wouldn't be here, that's your task. You go home and you tell people, I am defining a world with you that matters and that has meaning. And as you do that, your life will take on meaning. You will discover that you do indeed matter. And you will discover that you are helping along a world, and in fact, you are God's co-creator on the face of this earth. Shabbat shalom. So I didn't leave as much time as Joel did, but then I started a little later, and I didn't talk quite as fast, but all right. Maybe I did talk as fast, but it's easier to talk fast than to listen fast. So do you want to take questions? I actually don't see very well, so I can't see if your hand is up or not. So I'll allow my helper over here. What's your name? I can't even see who.
Becca.
Yeah, oh yes, now I see you again. I remember. Thanks. Yeah.
I was just thinking, when you talk about meaning, isn't that really another way of saying we need new limits, new truths, because there is no meaning outside those things?
Yes, you are right. In other words, we need all three all the time. But now we are aware that only through meaning can we arrive at the limits that will be meaningful to us. So we start with meaning today, but we still need the other. Truths, of course, are true whether we like them or not. But we can choose which truths to act upon that are part of our lives and which truths, we can make secondary and so on. So even there, it's the picture of our lives that will determine the limits that we all adopt as a community and that we live by personally, and the same thing for the truths. We do need both, you're right.
Becca, at the back.
Thank you. Would you agree with the view that the rift between science and religion came in the 19th century and may have been based on misunderstanding?
Ask me that again.
Do you agree with the view that the rift between science and religion came in the 19th century and was based on misunderstanding?
So, no. The rift came earlier. The rift came already with Newton. And the rift came already by the 17th century and was alive and well in the philosophy of the 18th century and to some extent in the 19th century. But it didn't strike Jews until the 19th century. And that is because we were in ghettos until then, largely. It was Napoleon who released us from ghettos. And when that happened, the forces of the Enlightenment and science struck us, but struck us late as a community. So you don't see the fullness for us until the 19th century. By the 16th century, it was already starting the Reformation, Protestant Reformation. We got our Protestant Reformation in the 19th century with Reform. So we replicate what happened earlier only because we were not free for the winds of change to strike us as communities.
A couple more questions?
Brilliant talk. Thank you, Larry.
Lovely. Thank you very much for your contribution. I thought.
Yeah. But here's the question.
Yes.
So you've talked about limits, truth, and meaning as historical moments in time, and that we're living in an historic time. And many of us are grappling with the technological revolution, right? The speed of communication, the misinformation, the fake news. So from what you've learned over many years, can you help us manage that? What is there in Jewish history, in these moments that help manage this vast array of information and misinformation that we're grappling with that we can't make sense of, because there are so many dots, I don't know which ones I'm connecting anymore.
Yeah. The easy answer for that is yes. Next question. But actually, I take you far more seriously than that. The answer is, I think we all need one another to find our way through it, because we are living at this liminal moment in time. Now, in fact, this kind of uncertainty is the same thing that happened when science occurred. It's not as if this is the first time we human beings have found ourselves in what I called this morning a singularity. Remember that? I talked about that this morning, and I asked about what is technology, how it's changing our lives, and so on. And one of the things I asked was what could we learn from, for example, technology, and I used a Buberian example. And I said, among other things, we can learn that the whole world is listening. Among other things, we can learn from Zoom that we are all connected, and on and on. But I don't know the full answer to what we can learn and how we find our way through it. No human being can claim to that, I don't think, certainly not me. But I do know that we all need one another for it, and that we will decide all of that in community. And I also know we will find our way out of the mess. Because for many people, it's a crisis. I don't believe in crises. I believe in every crisis is an opportunity. I believe in crisopportunities. We are living in a crisopportunity. We can either be afraid of the change, or we can welcome it as a grand new step in the human progress forward. And we will find our way. Especially, I can say, as Jews, whatever happens, we've sort of been here before. It's not like we're new to change. It's not like we're new to altogether new challenges. We've had harder. And so I just welcome what, in fact, now I'm a guest in your community, but those who know me know I have a special affinity to being here, and I feel like this is my home away from home. And so I look forward to seeing what you all decide together. So I want to just say welcome to the future, a future that you will decide. And believe me, you will connect the dots, and you will help us all worldwide, wherever we happen to live as Jews. You will help us see how the picture we come up with can be beautiful, profound, altogether authentic, and just what we need for the new era. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you so much, Larry. Just a reminder of what's happening now. So Larry is saving his next session that Larry and I were going to do together about conversation between what's happening now, US side of the pond, and here, and what matters Jewishly. That will now be tomorrow morning. So it frees up one of your slots. That will be first thing in the morning at 9:45. And then Larry's Jewish conversation will be at 1:30 tomorrow. So now, right here in the county suite is Rabbis Baginsky and Levy will be here in the county suite. Everything else is as it says. So you have 15 minutes of a comfort
What time do this session finish?
That's that made it very loud.
Anybody? Your first task is to see if we can make a circle, leaving like a few spare chairs. So, but less than there is now.
Some people aren't sitting in the circle.
Some people aren't sitting in the circle.
No, they have to.
Yeah, there's you have to.
No. I just went and spoke to them all. They were all very clear that they were very uncomfortable.
Hello. How you doing? It's fine.
Presumptuous. So he's right, it was really presumptuous. Right?
Oh, hello.
We're going to have a picture taken this as well.
We are going to have our picture taken.
Cool.
Get used to it.
Great. I just can't go to the Rabbi.
Okay. Larry, come and join us. Yeah.
Well, that is how it works then.
I want to begin by pointing out that this is quite a significant moment. Only Josh and I have I was going to say only been seen in public twice, but I don't really mean it like that. We've only done a presentation, talked to people once before, and that was to our joint clergy. So this is really lovely for us that the first time we get to do it to clergy and our lay leadership is here on Biennial. Every time, or that one time that we've done that, we started with a Shehechianu, because it really is a moment. And Larry, we know that you wanted to be here very much, and so we thought we'd ask you to begin this session for us with you have to wait for the mic, it is coming. That doesn't mean that you get to hold on to it for the next hour, okay? It's just...
Take a deep breath for a minute and just recognize you are in a moment in history, you know? People often miss history because they sleep through it. And then later on, count on it, your grandchildren say, were you alive then? And you know you were living then, but maybe you weren't fully alive then. So this is a moment to be alive in and say, you know, this is what a treat, what a privilege. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehayanu, v'kimanu, v'higianu, lazman hazeh.
So we want to begin with history. We're not going to spend a lot of time on history this afternoon because we've got work to do. We've got the present to live in. But we wanted to begin with two documents, telling you about two documents that we have that have come to our desks or come to us over the course of the last few weeks. So I want to tell you about something which is currently on my desk at home. In fact, it's been on my desk at home for a couple of years, which is a letter from 1933. And it's a letter about the creation of the community that I serve. So I have the privilege of being principal rabbi of Aleph, Northwestern Reformed Synagogue, which was set up 90 years ago this month. It had its first meeting on the 24th of May, 1933. And on my desk is a letter. And the letter is a letter explaining that the Jews who are moving out to Golders Green would have to work with West London Synagogue, not with the JRU, because a few years previously, West London and the JRU had had a conversation about how to divide up London between them. And when the Jews who were moving out into Golders Green wanted to build a synagogue, they wrote to both. And so the synagogue that I serve, Aleph, which is now a community of 3,500 people, which originally was called Hampstead Reform Congregation. I wish they'd kept that name. That would have been so much better a name. But Northwestern Reform Synagogue, known as Aleph because of the road it's on. It's a Reform synagogue by a matter of fluke. It's just, that's the way it happened. So when Harold Reinhardt went to West London Synagogue in the late 1920s and decided that as well as West London and the other synagogues which were breakaways from the authority of the chief rabbi, he was actually going to create reform synagogues. He was going to be ambitious and encourage building. And at the same time, the leadership of the JRU were doing the same exercise. For whatever reason, they decided that they were going to do it separately. And so the synagogue that I've served for 15 years is a reform synagogue, not because of any issue of ideology or liturgy, because the Jews who were moving out to Golders Green who wanted a progressive Judaism didn't care what prayer book they had in their hand. They just wanted a prayer book that spoke their language and articulated who they were, and they wanted the freedom to create a Jewish life for themselves, and purely by coincidence, or maybe not coincidence, but purely by sort of fluke of geography, those Jews ended up having a Reform synagogue following the liturgy of West London Synagogue. It's just a moment from history, but a moment that speaks to the fact that we are also making tikkun. We are dealing with something which happened to us rather than being really intentional over the course of the last 100, 120 years.
So Josh and I were both at Leo Beck College together at pretty much the same time, although JC reminds that Josh is a little bit older than me. And I grew up, as most of you know, really grounded in liberal Judaism. My parents ended up at a liberal synagogue really because of nature of geography. But my parents were married by John Rayner, Rabbi John Rayner, who then went on to baby bless me. And in fact, my parents always tell that one thing, they were so moved that this very senior rabbi of the LJS came back to their very tiny flat in West Hampstead after the baby blessing. And today, I was passed an article or a series written up of 3 talks by Rabbi David Goldberg, who actually my favorite biennial memory was when I'd come back from Israel, I think following Shnat. It was probably a little bit bombastic. And I was put on a panel about Israel with David. And Carol, for many, many years after that, says, I love you, Charley, but I still remember that biennial where you were so very rude to David about Israel. I'm not sure I was very rude, but certainly, these are our biennial memories. Anyway, I was given this article today, To Merge or Not to Merge, which is 3 talks by Rabbi David Goldberg and Rabbi John D. Rayner, and the historical background of and the issues involved in the current discussions about a possible unification of the Union of Liberal and Progressive Synagogues and Reform Synagogues of Great Britain, given in February 1984. And so I sat at the reception as I was waiting for Josh to arrive, and I was reading through it, and I was really struck by the last page. I mean, lots of it. It's really worth a read, actually. But I was particularly struck by one of the questions which David sought to answer, which is, what would be the material advantages or disadvantages resulting from a merger? And, well, I'll read it to you. But the interesting thing for Josh, and as soon as he came here, I showed him, was that this is exactly what we have been, almost to the exact words, we've talked about, and you'll see why this is relevant, we've talked about that this is not about saving money on photocopiers. And so he says, if we start with the material as opposed to spiritual advantages, it is only because, as I wrote in an article recently, Jews think of mergers in connection with the business world. And no doubt it won't be long before shareholders are canvassed by advertisements in the Financial Times and the stock exchange suspends dealings in our two companies. So even then, there was the obvious language of this makes sense. And that language hasn't really changed. So what has changed? So we wanted to spend a little bit now talking about, well, what has changed? If this is, we've had moments of like this in the past, what is different this time? We were, I mean, the first moment that we had where we realized this was different was when our two clergy organisations came together. I mean, look, you know, there have been other moments, but this was really the turning point, which only was in December. In December, both of our clergies came together for a joint meeting. It does happen from time to time, and hopefully it will happen more now. And at the end of that meeting, what was said was, what we need is a vision for progressive Judaism in the UK. And it seemed like the most obvious thing in the world, but the one question that as two movements we hadn't been talking about. And from there, very, very quickly, the boards became involved in that discussion. And very, very quickly we realised that actually that was exactly the moment to be doing that. We've talked a little bit about the fact that in some ways COVID did make a huge difference. Not so much because of any financial implications, but rather because we started working in collaborative ways that we just hadn't done before. But I think really it also happened because we realised that we could change. If we think how quickly we adapted during COVID, things where people had said, do you know what, this takes a huge amount of time to sit down and make a discussion about this, and maybe next week you might decide the chairs need changing. Suddenly during COVID, we make enormous changes to our communities almost overnight. And so I think we learnt during that period that actually if we want to jump into the sea, if we want to make real difference, we really could.
So one of the things that's clear to us is that on some level, this just feels obvious, right? It feels historically obvious. It was obvious to the guys who were setting up Aleph in 1933. It was obvious to David and to John in 1984, and to so many of their Reform colleagues as well. And it was not for want of obviousness that they didn't do it in 1984. It was actually for want of will and bravery, if you look back on what happened. It's obvious to us, as people who studied together. You know, I studied with John Rayner. He was my teacher, as much as he was Charley's. It's obvious to us as people who were together at Leobeck College. It was obvious in the light of COVID. But it's not just about this being obvious. This is also a moment of need, a moment for ambition. There is something that is demanded of us as well. So the other thing that we've been realizing, and you know, we're going to speak a little bit about what we're going to build. We will get to that, don't worry. But the other thing we've realized is this is a moment that is calling out for progressive religion. This is our moment. And we are best going to do this if we do this together. It is our moment because we live in a country which is liberal with a small L, and that needs a religious life that reflects that. You know, we should be extraordinarily proud of the fact that we live in a liberal, tolerant country, and we have a unique religious offering to speak to that. We live in a country which needs our voice, that needs us to be out there speaking about what religion can be, but also about what religion, progressive religion, has to say about social justice, about Israel. There's a moment and there's a calling of us. There is a moment because right now in this country, despite all of our successes, there are a huge number of people who are not living Jewish lives to whom we are not reaching out. We don't know what the next synagogue membership survey will tell us, but the last one, which was 2016, tells us that there are pretty much as many households in this country that have a Jew in that are not affiliated to a synagogue or community as there are that are affiliated to a synagogue or community. And why do I think that is? I don't think it's because of them. I think it's because of us. It's because of what we are doing and how we are being. And this is also a moment when our communities and our clergy also need movement, need us to be something different, to think differently about how we resource and support synagogues and communities, how we enable rabbis to work creatively and sustainably, how we speak and think and write differently. So on the one hand, this is just obvious. But on the other hand, it's a moment that is calling out to us to do something different and be something different and to create something different. And we've been given this amazing opportunity because the boards of the two movements have said, go and answer that question. Go and think about what that will look like. We don't quite have a blank sheet of paper, but really we have a blank sheet of paper to say, if we were creating a movement from scratch, because that's what we're going to do in this act of co-creation, what is it for? What will it look like? How will it know it's been successful?
And that's why we hate the word merger, right? I know that there's been a lot of jokes about that over this weekend, but that is why we don't like the word merger.
We know there's the merger drinking game, by the way. We know that there's the thing. Every time we say it's not a merger, we know that. We've heard that already.
We know also that there are going to be, go on, do your Italian.
I can't do it in Italian. There's an Italian expression that I still haven't got down pat.
See, we're getting this
called, which says, the knots will come to the comb. So that when you're brushing your hair, the knots are going to be there. They're going to come to the comb whether you like it or not. So we know there's going to be knots that come to the comb, but that's not where we're starting from. And of course, the thing we know is eventually you brush your way through them. You have to work your way through them to comb your hair.
And we really, really do know that there are going to be those knots and that we are going to have to deal with them and want to deal with them, that they're important. And hearing from all communities about and individuals about what those knots might be and helping us comb our way through them. But we want to take you a little bit before we do that to the excitement, because, and I know you in this room know that I do excitement. It excites me, especially on Biennial. It's a time for being enthusiastic. But we'd like to take you a little bit on that journey about why we're excited and hopefully hear a little bit from you about what might excite you. This is an exercise that we did with the rabbis and clergy, with the clergy from both movements. And it filled our room, I think, with a huge amount of joy because it was really wonderful. So we'd like to take you a little bit along that. But in order to do that, there are a couple of, first, we'll start by giving you a little bit of an example about what we mean. The second is that there's a choice of language that we're going to use, which I know is a little bit cheesy, but it does work, which goes like this. Instead of saying, this concerns me, this worries me, we're staying in the language of, I'm excited by the possible, right? I'm excited by the possibility of Okay, this is the language we're using. So, Josh, do you want to start us off by giving us an example about what are you excited of the possibility of?
So I'm a congregational rabbi at heart. So I'm excited by the possibility of us really creating something that supports synagogues and communities to be sustainable and ambitious and to embed good practice moving forwards. So I'm excited by, when I shut my eyes, what do I imagine? I'm excited by the Center for Synagogue and Communal Excellence, in which we pour a huge amount of resource that Charley and I go and fundraise to get into training for lay leaders, into resources for synagogues, into helping us to do the demographic research, which means that we know where Jews are moving and are able to respond to that help us to resource communities in different ways with clergy support for smaller communities and for larger communities going through transition, and which enable us to really think about how do we ensure that we are creating a rich intellectual and prayer life in our communities that people who are coming fresh to Judaism can also access as well. So you don't have to speak as long as I do. But that's what I'm excited about. What are you excited by, Charley? Finish the sentence. I'm excited by.
I'm excited by the possibility of us being a really thinking movement and being able to publish and give our rabbis and our educators real time and resource to do the thinking that guides our movement as we go into the future. Our rabbis, our educators are often really, they're really full doing their community life. But if we're going to continue to progress, to be a movement, we need to have real thinking and we need to be putting our words out there. So I'm really excited by the possibility of having thought, of growing our thinking and our voice and that multiplicity of voices. I'm really excited by that.
So this moment, it's not just obvious, it's not just ambitious and demanding of us, it's also exciting. So we are going to ask you to share what's exciting for you as well. We're going to ask you just to turn to the person next to you. You can obviously do it in 3s or 4s, but this is going to work best if you are in conversation with someone, because that's how we roll as Jews. To be in conversation with someone else and together to speak about what's exciting about this moment. What's possible? If you shut your eyes and imagine, don't worry about the reasons it might be complicated. Don't worry about how we're going to pay for it. That's our problem. We're going to make that happen, right? We are committed to making sure that we are resourcing everything that we can. Don't worry about the governance structures or the funding models or don't worry about any of that stuff. Just answer the question, finish the sentence, I am excited by, because that's what this moment demands of us. So I'm going to ask you just to take some time. We're going to, how long are we going to have? 10, 15 minutes to turn to someone next to you and to try and finish that sentence.
And if you're at home and you're watching this, feel free in the Zoom room to, no Zoom room. If you're at home and you're watching this, feel free to put your thoughts up, to jot it down in front of you, to enter the conversation in any way that you can. And don't worry, because we will be coming to a community near you very soon. Okay, we're going to come back. We would like to hear from the circle. I know that not everybody will want to say something, so we're going to pass the mic round. If you don't, just pass it a bit like, the speaking stick. If you don't, we're going to start this side. If you don't want it, just pass it on to the next. But remember, we are staying in the language of, I am excited by the possibility of.
Anytime. I'm excited. I'm unaffiliated, but I'm excited by the possibility of being on the ground up. I'm also very excited by the creative possibilities as somebody who writes poetry and monologues. And I want to be in there contributing to the Siddur and whatever, because I've got things that are appropriate. And I think it's thrilling. I think it's fascinating. I think it's going to be intellectually incredibly challenging. And one of the things that I really liked in the sessions before, which will contribute to this, is Judith and Leia's incredibly thoughtful theological developments. And it sent shivers down my spine.
Amazing. Thank you.
We just talk.
You don't have to speak. You can pass.
Do you want to do anything?
You can do it.
Well, I'm not going to say what you're going to say. I'm excited by the possibility of giving a higher profile via the media to the wider community.
Absolutely. Hear, hear.
I'm excited as someone on the other side of the Atlantic of having such an exciting and intentional community as a diaspora partner across the pond.
I'm excited by the opportunity of sharing a more coherent message to a world that is in a real state of angst, that desperately needs to know that there's positivity in religion and that we care about it. And we'll have a louder voice to do it with.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kath.
I'm excited about what it might mean for our young people in our communities, especially for those of us outside of London. And I'm particularly keen on what it might mean for our students on campuses. That
Absolutely.
As a progressive voice, we could probably offer them an awful lot more together.
And I really hope that we'll have some progress on that very, very quickly.
I'm excited about a go-to progressive voice on all social issues.
Yes.
I'm excited on a practical level of thinking about that census and thinking about the 50% who don't have an affiliation and what possibilities there are for us.
Absolutely.
I'm excited by the idea of rethinking synagogue services to attract more people to join us for those services.
Thank you.
I welcome the opportunity that this will give us to bring mind and body together, and that we won't be working in binary right and wrong, but there's different solutions and different opportunities to bring joy and positivity to the world.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jackie.
I am excited because I hope that it will enable liberal Judaism as an ideology to exert some influence on American progressive Judaism without accusations of sectarianism.
Thank you, John.
I'm excited about the idea of a progressive Jewish voice that feels sort of co-equal nationally with Orthodox Judaism and feels like it's a real kind of national presence that can have some influence outside the community as well.
Great, and Ben, we're really hoping you're going to be a part of that.
I'm excited because I think it will give strength to communities away from London, which are much smaller, and it'll help us combine our resources more and be much more of a force for good.
Really interestingly, that one of our rabbis said brilliantly, Debbie said on when we said about not saving money on photocopiers, she said, actually, I really hope that it is also about saving money on photocopies because it means that we can grow our resources by working together in other areas. So thank you.
I'm excited that we could actually prove that Italian saying that came out there is actually a bit of a myth. And why I was saying that is because clearly I have curly hair, get tangled hair a lot. But, you start at the ends and you work your way up to the roots. And for me, I'm excited that we might get that possibility to redefine together what progressive Judaism is.
Lovely, thank you. I love that our midrash is growing on our midrash. It's amazing. Thank you, Tanya.
I'm excited that our rabbis, when they're being trained, are being trained as liberal rabbis, progressive rabbis, and that they don't have to differentiate between the two strands. And it should hopefully make what they do at the college even more streamlined and more unified and better.
Thank you, Jane. Jane's on the board for the college, by the way. So.
I'm excited by the possibility of and the fact that we will develop progressive Judaism in Scotland with our fellow congregants in Glasgow.
Absolutely.
I'm excited by the possibility of pretty much everything that's been said already, particularly the point about reaching progressive Jewish students who feel a bit alienated by some of the more traditional organisations out there on campus. I'm also excited by the possibility of a new dynamism, really, like dynamic ways of reaching out to kind of the community, yeah.
Thank you.
What I'm excited about has already been said, but I particularly agree with Ben.
I think that's the same, exactly the same.
Thank you.
I'm excited that we won't have to explain to the outside world and some Jews the difference between liberal and reform.
Amazing. Can you pass it behind you?
I'm excited about the possibility of joint support for community educators and head teachers, which has been separate up to now.
Yes, thank you.
I'm excited by the thought that when Josh said about there's probably twice as many families with a Jewish person in, we can perhaps be more welcoming to those non-Jewish partners and include them in our new progressive Judaism.
Absolutely. That's actually what we were talking about when we were talking about what we were excited about.
I'm excited about the possibility of a chief rabbi for progressive Judaism.
Oh, we won't ask for your nominations today.
I'm excited about the possibilities for collaboration between Reform and liberal synagogues in a similar area.
I'm excited about the possibility of communities being able to learn more from each other because there'll be a broader spread of communities to share ideas between each other.
I'm excited by the liberating possibilities of this co-created vision and breaking some of the shackles that both movements feel.
On the same theme, 40 years ago, I was not excited by the idea of extreme negative views, and now it feels as though we've got more moderate positive views.
I think it's been said already, but I think it's worth saying again. I'm excited by the idea of a single voice, single movement for progressive Judaism in this country.
I think it's very interesting, you know, that there were people that were members of the Reform who actually joined liberal Judaism, and I went the other way. I didn't join them, but I went to the services. But in one particular person was Henry Cohn. His father was the president of Aleph, and he came to Birmingham and he joined a progressive synagogue there. But when he left Birmingham, he went back to Aleph Garden. So. But it just shows you the similarity. I mean, other than, you know, it was the father was Jewish or the mum was Jewish, you know, made the difference. But it just shows you that for years there have been people that were both sides of the fence.
So you're excited by the possibility.
I'd be glad to see just one.
Great. I just want to say something about Henry. So Henry, who was...
Many people here will know.
Was such a macher at Birmingham, grew up at Aleph, came back to Aleph, And one of the many messages we got after this was announced was from his widow, Loretta, who sent a note to say just how proud he would be and how pleased he would be. And one of the things that's just been extraordinary for both of us has been the messages we've had from people who were around in 1984 when it was a much more complex thing, who feel that we are fulfilling their work for them from across both communities. And so, you know, Henry was very special in my life, and to have had that from Loretta was very important, because it does feel like we're doing their work for them.
Yeah, he was a good man. By the way, he was also as a part of LJ, wasn't he?
Absolutely, his name was mentioned last night as well.
Yeah, okay. He was a vice president.
I'm excited because of the opportunities for communities to work together and for them to forge a new relationship with the centre.
I'm excited for so many reasons. One is that I no longer have to pretend that I'm not a Reform Jew. Another is, we were discussing the differences between Reform and Liberal Jews, and how, as somebody from Brazil, it was not so clear, and where we've got to in our understanding, and being a member of a Reform community and working for LJ, and I would say being a part of the LJY community, even though I'm an adult, I think there is so much that we can learn from each other. There are so many wonderful things in both movements. I'm very proud to be a Reform Jew, and I'm very proud to be a Liberal Jew. And I do very much feel I am both, and now I will just be a Progressive Jew. And I think there is so much rich and wonderfulness that we can all learn from each other and be much stronger together.
Thank you.
So I would say first that I'm really excited not to have to learn anymore what are the differences that I really don't get up until now, 1 year after. But actually what I'm really excited about is the possibility of a growing and stronger progressive Judaism here in England, to reflect, hopefully, to the rest of the world.
I'm very excited about finding a new sense of confidence, and that can be infectious around all of our congregations, so that they truly work together, not feeling in competition with each other in any shape or form, indeed actually helping and enabling those people who are unaffiliated to find their right place, which may not actually be in the building which they first walked through the doors of, because they can refer somewhere else.
I'm excited by everything you've all said, but one of the things I'm most excited about is the fact that I'm actually making new friendships here today and yesterday and hopefully tomorrow, and that because of all of you and all the people who are part of the Reform movement, that we can together, combined, create something much, much greater. And the idea that there will be an even greater multiplicity of doors through which people can find their Jewish lives is really, really exciting to me.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm excited about the fact that in an era of a lot of schisms and differentiations and anger and hatred and extremism, you think about the most important things. You think about the large tent kind of Judaism, and that's really encouraging. Thank you.
I think we've got a few contributions online as well.
We do have a couple of contributions online. Jason Brown says, I'm excited for a better representation and support of all communities in the UK and outside, a progressive Judaism to society and outside the synagogues.
That's Jason in Ireland.
Jason in
Ireland.
Ireland.
Hi, Jason.
We've got another, this one, you're going to have to work this one out. I'm excited by the possibility of a massive extended argument that can hopefully lead to more thinking, examination of thinking, and more openness.
Great. Debate.
Yeah. Yes. Talmudic dialectic. We'll go for. Is that it? Great. Okay. So we are really excited too. Hugely excited about what this can be. and to be granted, not just Charley and me, but as a generation of leadership, the opportunity to build something new to those excitements. So there are two things that are going to happen in parallel with each other, two sort of work streams from here on in. One is the visioning and the dreaming. Yeah, essentially, we've got to build together a design brief for a new movement. And that's what we just started to do. We just started to come up with the things that, if we build the right entity, it will do for us, right? It will mean that we are represented in the world in a different way. It will mean that we allow creativity in the relationships between synagogues in a different way, and so on, right? And so we're beginning by having this conversation to work out what success will look like. And so that conversation is going to take place over the next 6 to 9 months. We are going to be going out into communities, holding regional meetings, town halls, one-on-ones with people, as we begin to work out what success will look like. Obviously, both of us have a sort of an organogram in our heads. Of course we do. You'd want us to have a sense of what it is we're building, but we need to do this right. We get one hit at it, one opportunity to do this for fresh. And so we're going to have a lot of conversations about how we're going to know that we've done it well, what success will look like, okay? So that's one of the work streams. Can I come back to you, is that all right? That's one of the work streams that's going to happen that we've been tasked with. Alongside that is the process of actually building a new organization. That's the kind of the complex, detailed bit, which will also be fun in its way, but is a slightly different kind of a fun for us. So how's that going to work? That's going to be overseen by an independent advisory board that has representatives of both movements, Charley and me, and people who are bringing expertises from their the skills that we need to make that work. When we come up against one of the knots, the idea is that we're going to set up a group of people to go away and get us through the knot, to comb through it. From the roots, apparently. Not from the roots,
No,
from the ends, not from the roots. Not
roots.
from the roots. There's a reason I don't get to brush my daughter's hair, right? Now I
She's
understand
also a bit old.
She's a bit old
She's
now,
a bit
that's
old.
true. That is
That would
true.
be
But
a
when
bit
she was
old.
little, now I understand why she used to cry. Okay. So we know what some of those groups will have to be. You know, we know that we've got to have a group that's going to really look at governance. We know that we're going to need to look again at funding models, right? Actually, the model of funding for central movements is not going to be sustainable as it stands moving forwards. Anyone who's working in synagogue understands that and knows that, because we need to find new ways of funding the work that we do together. Right? So we're going to have to answer that really difficult question. We know that we're going to need to have subgroups looking at how our youth movements are going to work together. 2 youth movements, both of which we're incredibly proud of, both of which have unique offerings, but can work more effectively by working together and sharing resource in a different way. We know that we're going to have a working group on our Batei Din. How are they going to work side by side and alongside each other, and so on and so forth. So we know that we're going to have these little subgroups. But the advisory group is going to be asking a different question to the question that they asked in 1984. In 1984, they asked the question, can we bring these two movements together? We're not asking that question. The question we're asking is, how are we creating this new entity that both of our movements are building together? It's a different question we're going to ask because of all the things we began with, that this is obvious, that this is a tikkun, this is the fulfillment of a vision of people like Henry, who never understood why we were like that. That this is an opportunity for us in terms of our relationship with the wider world. That this is a moment of calling from our synagogues and our communities about how do we resource and support them properly in the work that they do so that they can work more effectively. For all of those reasons, we're not asking the question, can we do this? If you ask that question, the answer is probably going to be not the one you want to hear. We're going to be asking the question, how do we do this? So we are going to be working fast, as you know, and one of the things we all want to recognize is at the very beginning it happened really fast, and that's something that kind of took a few people by surprise. It was a moment of kind of inhalation, and so to recognize we're moving fast, but we're also going to work slowly enough that we can make sure that we're really getting it right at the same time as well. In terms of the critical path, we think that this is an 18-month to 2-year project, probably, but with a very exciting goal in mind. So what we would like to do, you get to tell this one.
Yeah. What we want to do, and Carol, if you're listening, Phyllis, that 2026 is 100 years since the founding of the World Union, which happened here in the UK, where founders of liberal Judaism were very much, as well as Reform Jews, very much involved in the founding of the World Union for Progressive Judaism. It was a turning point in progressive Judaism in the world. It is only right that 2026 we have a huge international conference in the UK marking not only 100 years of the World Union for Progressive Judaism, but that we mark the moment of the final establishment of progressive Judaism here in the UK, which we are confident, we are excited by, and that we really, really believe will be the founding stone to guide progressive Judaism in the world. Let's hope, So that's our intention, that's our excitement, that's our critical path.
Okay, so we have got about 15, 20 minutes left. No. Have we not? 5:30, no?
Is it 5:30? Yeah, okay, go. Yeah, sorry,
I know your program.
He's learning.
We wanted to have time for questions and for thoughts. We also wanted to do something we haven't done before, which is we recognize that one of the kind of knots that might come to the comb, one of the things we need to do is also to build the opportunities for understanding as well. So to recognize that, in doing this, one of the other things we need to do is to be able to share who we are. So one of the things that we are putting ourselves up to do is also to ask questions about and answer questions about the other. Because this is a moment of understanding. So there are questions, and we'll come around, and I haven't forgotten, we'll come to you. But also, if anyone has a question that they desperately want to ask about Reform Judaism, I cannot promise that I know the answer. But I will do my best to speak about where there are difference of emphasis, where there are things you think you might have heard that
Whether all biennials always have bacon on them.
Sorry?
Whether biennials always have bacon on them, you might want to.
I don't know anything about that. But those sorts, if there are questions or things that you would want to ask about, then we're really happy to try and answer that as well, because we get that this is also a moment of understanding and coming together. And I think probably the first time a Reform rabbi has sat in a biennial and said, ask me the difficult questions about Reform Judaism and I'll try to answer.
Danny says no.
Danny said no? Tony? Ah. Brilliant. Great. Oh, Shoshana did it.
Shoshana,
excellent. Okay,
excellent.
Great. So we have the opportunity. I think Becca is on phone. We're going to go over there first, I think, because yeah.
Hi. Is this working? Yes, it is. Hello, I'm Miriam. I come from a interfaith family. My husband recently just left Jackson's Row, and I have been a member of York Liberal for as long as I can remember, which isn't very far. I really, really support and I'm very excited by this merger. However, there's always a however, isn't there? One of the in the press release, there was much made of we're all basically the same. My real concern is that in our drive to be basically the same, we're going to erase voices, erase lived experience. Reform refused to convert me and my family. Liberal converted us. I'm sorry, excuse me, I'm sorry. My child, Esther, is the only liberal person on Schnat this year, okay, and was in the display on Friday night. we're not the same, and in insisting that we are, you'd be erasing me and my lived experience and my family's lived experience, and that is a violence I am not going to accept us doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. I want to say something, and I know that Josh wants to. When things go in the press, you don't always have control over what the messaging is, and I think that while we can acknowledge that there's been huge movement towards having much more in common than have been in the past, that actually we're not trying either to make a homogenous movement without differences in. One of the things that I've been learning during this experience has been how much breadth there is not only kind of across the movements, but within the movements. For the last 3 years, even when I could only travel between communities online, I've been in so many communities. And from whether that's minhagim to, literally in ritual, to whether that's culture within communities, there's a huge amount of difference. And we do not want to move away from that. Also, one of the things that we know, one of the reasons we have Home for Your Jewish Story as Liberal Judaism's tagline is because we know that there is a lot of lived experience within our communities, and actually I'm sure Josh is going to say within Reform communities as well, of people who didn't find their home somewhere else, and that story and that history, it's kind of what I was saying this morning as part of when I did my opening words, is that memory is really important. It's part of our history. I'm not going to stop being a liberal Jew because I'm also part of a progressive movement, and that preservation is really important. And building something new, it's partly why we hate the word merger, right? Because we are not looking to submerge one into the other. We are looking to build something new, and we take with that what we come from our histories, in the plural. And so I'm hearing you also saying the press wasn't exactly the message that the fact that we said this is not a merger and the big headline was merger. It's Josh.
So I think so I want to kind of reiterate some of that. I think it's very important to us that what we are not doing is a closing down. That's not what this is about. This is not about asking everyone who's a progressive Jew in the UK to suddenly fit into some mold that we have. The way we're thinking about this is really as an opening up. That is that we can celebrate the diversity within and between us and within and between our communities. We have extraordinarily diverse theologies in our clergy. What we don't have is anyone writing books, right? So we don't see it. So our task is not to say, let's close down the diverse theologies, it's to resource the writing of the books, right? We have extraordinarily diverse practices between and within, and sometimes within our communities, right? I mean, I have a community with multiple different minyanim in it, which have entirely different service styles within one synagogue. We can do that across progressive Judaism in the UK, and should be doing to enable that to happen. In terms of style of tefillah, Aleph has more in common with the Ark than it does with, let's say, Edgware. I was about to, Edgware, for example, right? And actually, that's an extraordinary thing, right? To recognize that we have that diversity. I think what's crucial is that we have shared values and shared outlook, and that hasn't always been the case. Like, we shouldn't pretend that we can't rewrite history either, right? And we have to acknowledge that. In particular, the Reform movement has been on a journey. When I say the Reform movement has been on a journey, I don't mean Reform Jews have been on a journey, and I don't mean Reform synagogues have been on a journey. The community that I serve has over 100 non-Jewish adults with full membership of its community, and has had non-Jewish membership structure since 2004, right? Right? Actually, one of the things about Reform Judaism is that it has had that diversity within it for a very long time. So I know that there were synagogues that were only just on that journey in the Reform movement, and there are very few synagogues in the liberal movement, if any, that are still on that journey. But to acknowledge that Reform Judaism has had that diversity within it, right? as I say, the community I serve, there is no concept of an associate member. There are members and non-members, right? And our 100 non-Jews are full members of our community. So I think just to recognize that diversity within Reform Judaism as well, but also that Reform Judaism has been on a journey of change, largely driven by a new generation of Reform rabbis who are approaching it in a slightly different way, their Jewish lives. But we have been on a journey around inherited status. You all know that. That was something that I had the privilege of leading the Reform movement on. Almost all of our synagogues now use our mechanism for recognizing the Jewish status of the child of a single Jewish parent without asking for conversion. There are just a couple of our synagogues who are still holding out. And I recognize that that's problematic, but that's about diversity within a movement. We've been on journeys around issues of celebration of mixed faith weddings. You know, when I started in the assembly, when I first was ordained, we weren't able to do that. We now can do that. We have slightly different guidelines to the conference about how to do it, but we want that diversity, right? We want to be able to say, I can't offer you the thing that's in your head, but Aaron can, right? And vice versa, right? But what we can both offer you is a community that wants to welcome you, a space that recognizes what your family brings, a place that wants to engage with and hear your journey and how you came to us, and have that diversity within us. The Reform movement has been through an extraordinary shift over the course of the last 15 or 20 years, and I think that's also something we shouldn't pretend that hasn't happened. Incidentally, the liberal movement has also been on a journey of its sort, right? And if you go into the history of 1984 and what the biggest stumbling block was in 1984, the biggest stumbling block in 1984, should I even say this?
Yeah, you can say it.
So the biggest stumbling block in 1984 was that Alpsnick refused to work with the Reform movement because the Reform movement was Zionist.
One of the things.
One of the things, but it was, if you go back to it, if you look at the notes from it, right? Because the Reform movement was Zionist and Alpsnick was not Zionist at that point. Now, across our movements, there are plenty of people who are Zionists. There are plenty of people who are not Zionists, and there are lots of people who are really struggling about how do we have a powerful voice on Israel that articulates our values as progressive Jews, that somehow can speak about Israel and from the perspective of Judaism in a way which is powerful. And we are partners with the IMPJ and Iraq in being in that conversation, which is
6:30 demonstration, by the way.
Right. So I think that really important thing, which is we are now. I think even where we differ, we're now in the same task. I think that's what's so important.
We had a question from Mark. Mark, just introduce yourself.
I will try not to give quite such a long answer next time. I'm sorry, I've just realised.
Hi, I'm Mark Shaw. I'm chair of Southgate. One of the things I think is going to be key to success is, and maybe this should be one of the first things to consider, is your communication strategy to all communities, liberal and reform. And so at regular various steps, the exact same message is given out to community leaders so that we can deliver that same message at the same steps to our individual communities, so that we're all on the same page and moving at the same speed and time.
Yeah, I mean, we literally could not agree with you more. We need a shared comms strategy, absolutely. We also, one of the big challenges that we have in the exercise that we just did just now of what am I excited about is how do we maintain that momentum of being excited that we're going to have time, it is going to take us time to get there. And so communication is going to be absolutely essential. And actually there begins to be things that we can, I don't know how many of you picked up in this week's e-bulletin when you saw every week it says who's in the Jewish news, and it gives you the liberal rabbi who's featured in Jewish news. Anybody spot that last week it was Rabbi Miriam Berger from a Reform community, and actually beginning to do that piece of sharing that comms piece, we'll be able to not only hold the momentum so people know what we're doing, it will enable us, it's a very low-hanging fruit in terms of being able to see very immediately how much this enables us to do and grows our offering and all of that. So number one on our kind of Tuesday list, actually, of things to do is working on doing that as soon as possible.
You should add that this is being streamed on both Reform and Liberal platforms.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And, you know, we'd love to come and do this also in person in Reform communities, obviously. I think we've got time for one more question. I can't believe it. Eve.
I'm sorry, it is a boring point about governance, which is governance really matters. And how are you going to make sure that this is something the individual communities feel they are co-creating with you rather than having done to them?
Great, excellent. So ultimately, let's jump forward a couple of years. Ultimately, this co-creation can only happen with the consent of the synagogues and the communities. Yeah, that's the reality in both of our movements. For the logical extension of this to take place, which is ultimately that Liberal Judaism and Reform Judaism put their assets into a new entity. In both of our movements, that can only happen with a vote of a vote of the synagogues. Constitutionally, that's going to happen. So this can only happen with consent. But of course, that's at the end of the process. In order for us to get there, it doesn't make sense for us to do this without it being a partnership. So it's not just about consent, it's also about what we build together. So if what we end up building at the end of this is not something which every community and our young people and our youth movements and our students have had the opportunity to help shape, then not only will we not get consent, but we won't do it properly, which is more important, right? So actually, if this isn't what you need at the end of this, if it doesn't meet the needs of our communities, if it doesn't, make clergy lives stronger and better, if it doesn't mean that we can serve the needs of people coming into our communities more, then we won't have done this well. And we can't do that without you. So when we say we are committed to doing this really in partnership with communities, to being out with you and having the conversations with you, we really mean it. Not just for political reasons, but because if we don't, we won't do it very well, right? And we have to do this right. We really see this as a kind of, like it's a gift. We've been given, Charley and I have been given this amazing gift, which is the opportunity to do something no one has ever done before, which is to lead the intentional creation of a new movement, right? Not something that just sort of evolved or happened, not with structures that we were bequeathed by generations before trying to solve their problems, but the real opportunity to do something, to create something new. And our commitment is we want to do it right? And the only way we do it right is if we are listening to the stakeholders in it and all of the stakeholders in it. So if this serves the needs of one set of communities and not the other set of communities, we won't do it right. If it serves one set of rabbis and not another set of rabbis, we won't do it right. If it's too focused on outreach and not enough on in-reach and the needs of our existing community members, we won't be doing this right. So really, our promise to you is that we want to do this in partnership with you because, that's the gift we've been given, is the opportunity to do this.
And in partnership with each other, right? And I want to kind of end with maybe where we should have started with, which is by introducing Rabbi Josh Levy to Liberal Judaism, because we can't take it for granted that even kind of 6 months ago, this wouldn't have been possible. And it wasn't on our program, right, 6 months ago, when we were putting together the program for Biennial, we were calling it LJ Matters. This wasn't here. And so it's kind of remarkable to end where we should have perhaps started, which is to say, this is a partnership, right? When I introduce Josh, I'm introducing my partner, your partner, our partner, Paul, in this process. And so, Josh, welcome to the Liberal Judaism family. We are beyond delighted that you chose your give up your Saturday to be with us on Biennial. We really, really hope that this is the beginning of many, many more rooms, stages, whatever that we are sharing together, and that we continue to invite each other into our homes and share space together. So thank you, and thank you. And look at Becca.
There you go, great.
That